The paper trembled in Nathan Brooks's hands. He stood in the Human Resources office on the 14th floor of Nexus Technologies, Seattle's rain streaking down the floor-to-ceiling windows like tears the sky was crying on his behalf. The words on the termination letter blurred before his eyes, but certain phrases burned through with terrible clarity. Gross negligence, server crash, $200,000 in damages, immediate termination, 34 years old, 8 years with the company, and it had all come down to this single sheet of paper that accused him of destroying everything he had worked so hard to build. Gerald Patterson, the HR director, sat behind his mahogany desk with the practiced detachment of a man who had delivered this news hundreds of times before. His voice droned on about security protocols and exit procedures, but Nathan had stopped listening. All he could think about was the $47,000 he still owed from Sarah's cancer treatment, the $1,800 in rent due next week for their small apartment in Tacoma, the $1,200 a month for Emma's daycare that he could no longer afford, and Emma. His gaze drifted to the glass partition that separated this office from the hallway beyond. There she stood, his 6-year-old daughter, clutching the straps of her butterfly backpack, her face bright with the innocent excitement of a child who thought she was being picked up early for their Friday pizza tradition. She didn't know. She couldn't know. "Mr. Brooks, are you listening?" Nathan forced his attention back to Gerald, who was sliding a cardboard box across the desk. "You have 15 minutes to collect your personal belongings. Security will escort you to your workstation and then to the exit." "The timestamps don't match," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you just look at the badge records, you'll see I wasn't anywhere near the server room when the crash happened. I was in the sub-level maintenance area with my daughter. I can prove it." Gerald's expression didn't change. "The system logs are clear, Mr. Brooks. Your credentials were used to access the primary server at 1432. The crash occurred at 1432. The logs don't lie. But I wasn't there. Someone else must have used my credentials. Someone. This decision is final." Gerald glanced at his watch, a gesture that felt almost choreographed, as if someone had instructed him to complete this termination as quickly as possible. "I suggest you use your remaining time wisely." Nathan rose from the chair on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. He took the cardboard box. He walked toward the door. And with every step, he felt another piece of his carefully constructed life crumbling away. 3 years ago, he had been a senior software engineer at Google, earning $180,000 a year, living in a beautiful home in Bellevue with his wife and newborn daughter. They had been happy. They had been safe. Then Sarah found the lump. The diagnosis came swift and brutal. Stage 3 breast cancer. They had caught it late, the doctor said, because Sarah had been so focused on the pregnancy, on Emma, on being a mother, that she had ignored the warning signs in her own body. The insurance company denied coverage. Pre-existing condition, they claimed, though Sarah had never been sick a day in her life before the diagnosis. Nathan sold his stock options, emptied their savings, took out loans that would haunt him for years. None of it was enough. Sarah died on a Tuesday morning in March, with Nathan holding her hand and 3-year-old Emma playing with blocks in the corner of the hospice room, too young to understand that her mother was leaving and never coming back. After that, Nathan couldn't go back to the 16-hour days at Google, couldn't stomach the idea of Emma being raised by strangers while he chased promotions and stock options. He took a job as a systems maintenance technician at Nexus Technologies, a position far beneath his qualifications, but one that allowed him to drop Emma off at school every morning and pick her up at 4 o'clock every afternoon. He had chosen his daughter over his career, and now he had lost everything anyway. Nathan pushed through the HR office door and stepped into the hallway. Emma saw him immediately, her face lighting up with a smile that shattered what remained of his composure. "Daddy!" She ran to him, throwing her small arms around his legs. Are we going for pizza? You said we could get pizza today. Nathan knelt down to her level, fighting to keep his voice steady. Not yet, sweetheart. Daddy has to take care of something first. Emma's smile faltered. She looked at the cardboard box in his hands, at the security guard hovering a few feet away, at the way her father's eyes were red and glassy. Daddy, why are you sad? Before Nathan could answer, a voice cut through the hallway. Mr. Patterson. The voice was calm, authoritative, and unmistakably feminine. Nathan turned to see a woman striding toward them, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the precision of a metronome. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Nexus Technologies. Nathan had never spoken to her directly. She existed in a different stratosphere of the company, a realm of boardrooms and investor calls and quarterly reports that never intersected with his world of server maintenance and backup diagnostics. He knew her face from company presentations, her name from emails he never received, her reputation from whispered conversations in the break room. They said she was brilliant. They said she was ruthless. They said she had built Nexus Technologies from a garage startup into a $200 million enterprise through sheer force of will. What they never mentioned was how tired she looked up close, the faint shadows beneath her gray eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders, the loneliness that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a dying star. She was 42 years old, unmarried, childless, and more alone than anyone in the building could possibly imagine. Victoria stopped in front of Nathan and, without asking permission, took the termination letter from his hand. Her eyes moved across the text, and something shifted in her expression, something that looked almost like recognition. She looked at the timestamps on the document. She looked at Nathan. She looked at Emma, who was clutching her father's leg and staring up at this tall woman in the expensive charcoal suit with wide, curious eyes. The timestamps don't match, Victoria said quietly. Nathan's heart stopped. That's what I tried to tell them. I wasn't in the server room. I was in the sub-level maintenance area. I have badge records that prove it. Victoria folded the paper and held it at her side. Her gaze was steady, unreadable, but there was something burning behind those gray eyes. Something that looked almost like purpose. Come with me, she said. Gerald had emerged from his office, his face flushed with confusion and concern. Miss Sterling, is there something I can help you with? Victoria didn't even turn around. Return to your office, Mr. Patterson. Continue with your afternoon. The dismissal was absolute. Gerald opened his mouth to protest, thought better of it, and retreated. Nathan stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. The CEO of his former company had just intervened in his termination, had taken his side against her own HR department, had told him to follow her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Daddy? Emma tugged at his hand. Who is that lady? Nathan looked down at his daughter, then back at Victoria, who was already walking down the corridor, clearly expecting them to follow. I don't know, sweetheart, he said honestly, but I think she might be trying to help us. They followed Victoria through the glass-walled corridors of Nexus Technologies, past the open floor plans where heads turned and conversation stopped mid-sentence. Nathan could feel the weight of every stare, could almost hear the questions forming in the minds of his former colleagues. Why was Victoria Sterling personally escorting the man who had just been fired for gross negligence? Why was there a child with them? What could possibly be happening? Emma pressed closer to Nathan's leg, intimidated by the unfamiliar environment and the strange tension in the air. He squeezed her hand gently, trying to convey a reassurance he didn't feel. They reached a small conference room at the end of a quiet hallway, far from the main work areas. Victoria opened the door and stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. The room was simple by corporate standards: a round table with 4 chairs, a window overlooking the gray Seattle skyline, a whiteboard that had been wiped clean. It felt private in a way that nothing else in this building did. "Sit," Victoria said, and it wasn't a command so much as a permission. Nathan helped Emma climb onto one of the chairs, then took the seat beside her. His cardboard box sat at his feet like a tombstone, marking the death of his career. Victoria remained standing for a long moment, studying them both. Then she took the seat across from Nathan and placed the termination letter on the table between them. "Tell me what happened," she said. "Not the official version, the truth." Emma tugged at Nathan's sleeve. "Daddy, I'm thirsty." Victoria pressed a button on the conference phone. "Marcus, could you bring some water and perhaps some juice for a child?" She paused, looking at Emma with an expression that softened almost imperceptibly. "And maybe some crackers if we have any." 2 minutes later, a young man appeared with a tray. Emma accepted the apple juice with a shy smile, and Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. This woman, this powerful CEO, who could have ignored him entirely, had thought to get his daughter a snack. After Marcus left, Victoria turned her attention back to Nathan. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." So he did. He told her about Emma waking up with a fever that morning, about calling every backup childcare option he could think of and coming up empty, about making the desperate decision to bring his daughter to work rather than miss another day and risk losing his job. He told her about setting Emma up in the sub-level maintenance break room with her tablet and some cartoons, while he ran routine diagnostics on the backup power systems. About being completely absorbed in his work when his phone started ringing, with frantic calls about a server crash that was somehow his fault. And then, because Victoria's steady gaze seemed to demand complete honesty, he told her about Sarah, about the cancer and the insurance denial and the mountain of medical debt, about leaving Google to be present for Emma, about choosing his daughter over his career and watching his professional reputation slowly dissolve into irrelevance. "I didn't cause that crash," Nathan said when he had finished. "I know everyone says that, but I didn't. I was with Emma the whole time. She can tell you. She was right there when my phone started ringing." Victoria's gaze shifted to the little girl, who had finished her juice and was now drawing on a napkin with a pen she had found somewhere. "Emma," Victoria said gently, "do you remember that day? The day you came to work with your daddy?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I had a temperature. Daddy said I was warm like a toaster. And do you remember what you were doing when a lot of people started calling your daddy's phone?" "We were drawing." Emma held up her napkin, which featured several wobbly cat shapes. "Daddy was teaching me to draw cat ears. Cat ears are triangles. I made 3 cats. One for me, one for Daddy, and one for Mommy in heaven." Nathan felt his throat tighten. Victoria's expression flickered with something that might have been pain. "How long had you been drawing before the phone call started?" Emma considered this carefully. "A long time. I finished 3 whole cats. That takes forever." Victoria nodded slowly, as if Emma had just confirmed something important. Then she rose from her chair and moved toward the door. "Stay here," she said to Nathan. "Both of you. I'll be back." She was almost out the door when Emma's voice stopped her. "Miss Lady," Victoria turned. "Yes? Do you have any kids?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Victoria stood perfectly still, and Nathan watched something vulnerable flash across her carefully composed features. "No," she said quietly. "I don't have any children." Emma tilted her head, her brow furrowing with the concentration of a child working through a puzzle. "Then who hugs you when you're sad?" Victoria didn't answer. She couldn't answer, because the truth was that no one hugged Victoria Sterling when she was sad. No one had in years. She went home to an empty penthouse in downtown Seattle, ate dinner alone, slept alone, and woke up alone to do it all over again. She had traded family for success, connection for achievement, love for power. In standing in the doorway of this conference room, looking at a 6-year-old girl who had lost her mother but still believed in heaven and cat drawings and the simple comfort of a hug. Victoria felt the weight of that trade more heavily than she had in years. "I'll be back," she repeated, her voice slightly rougher than before. And then she was gone, leaving Nathan and Emma alone with their apple juice and cat drawings and a growing sense that something important was happening, something that might change everything. Victoria's office occupied the corner of the executive floor, with windows that overlooked Elliott Bay and the gray waters of Puget Sound. It was designed to project authority without ostentation. Clean lines, muted colors, a spectacular view that she rarely had time to appreciate. On her desk sat a single-frame photograph, a woman with silver hair and gray eyes that matched Victoria's own. Her mother, Eleanor Sterling, taken 3 months before the pancreatic cancer claimed her. Eleanor had raised Victoria alone, working 3 jobs to put her daughter through school. She had never complained, never made excuses, never let Victoria see how hard it was. But Victoria had known. She had seen it in the shoes worn until they fell apart, in the meals skipped so Victoria could eat, in the exhaustion that her mother tried so hard to hide. Eleanor Sterling had been wrongfully fired from her job at a textile company when Victoria was 16. A co-worker had stolen money and blamed Eleanor, and no one had believed her denials. She had lost everything and had to start over from nothing. On her deathbed, Eleanor had made Victoria promise one thing: "Don't ever let an innocent person suffer what I suffered, not if you have the power to stop it." Victoria had spent 20 years building that power, and now sitting at her computer and pulling up the raw system logs from the server incident, she intended to use it. The first anomaly appeared within minutes. The crash had been initiated at 14:32:18, but Nathan Brooks's security badge had scanned at the sub-level maintenance area at 14:31, where it had remained for another 47 minutes. A person could not be in 2 places at once. Either the badge system was wrong, or the crash report was lying. Victoria pulled up the security footage from the server room. The image quality was poor, the angle awkward, but she could see someone sitting at workstation 7 at the time of the crash, someone wearing a dark jacket. Nathan's department wore light blue maintenance uniforms. She called Marcus into her office. "I need you to pull the access logs for Ryan Mitchell from the day of the incident, and I want the IT security team to trace any unauthorized access to Nathan Brooks' credentials over the past month. Also, get me Nathan Brooks's complete personnel file. I want to know everything about his background." Marcus nodded, asking no questions. He had worked for Victoria long enough to recognize when she was on the hunt. 20 minutes later, the picture became clearer. Ryan Mitchell had accessed the server room at 14:28, 4 minutes before the crash. His badge had scanned him out at 14:35, 3 minutes after. And buried in the IT security report was a damning detail. 3 days before the incident, someone had accessed Nathan's password from Ryan Mitchell's personal laptop. But there was more. Victoria opened Nathan's personnel file and felt her eyebrows rise. Senior software engineer at Google for 6 years. Specialized in cybersecurity and system architecture. Left voluntarily 3 years ago, citing family obligations. His technical qualifications far exceeded the requirements for his current position. This man had been one of the best in his field, and he had walked away from all of it. Victoria dug deeper into the server logs that Nathan had been accused of corrupting, and there, hidden beneath layers of manipulated data, she found something that made her blood run cold. This wasn't about a promotion. Someone had used the server crash to delete financial records, specifically records of wire transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Transfers authorized by the CFO, Howard Crane. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Howard had been with Nexus Technologies for 15 years. He was a founding member, a trusted advisor, a man she had relied on for financial guidance since the company's earliest days. He was also Ryan Mitchell's uncle, The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Ryan had been hired 3 years ago on Howard's recommendation. Ryan had been passed over for the senior systems position in favor of Nathan Brooks. And rather than accept defeat, Howard had orchestrated a scheme to eliminate the competition and, in the process, cover up what appeared to be a massive embezzlement operation. Nathan Brooks was never the target. He was just collateral damage. Victoria returned to the conference room to find Emma asleep on the table, her small head resting on her folded arms. Nathan sat beside her, one hand gently stroking her hair, his eyes fixed on her face with an expression of such profound love that Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. This was what she had given up, this quiet devotion, this simple, powerful love. "She fell asleep about 20 minutes ago," Nathan said softly. "She didn't sleep well last night. I think she knew something was wrong. Kids always know." Victoria took her seat across from him. "Mr. Brooks, I need you to look at something." She placed her tablet on the table and showed him the system logs. Nathan's brow furrowed as he studied the data, and then something changed in his expression. His eyes sharpened. His fingers began moving across the screen with the confident precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. "This log has been altered," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The original timestamp was 1428, not 1432. Someone used a pretty basic SQL injection to modify the records." He tapped the screen rapidly. "And here, this MAC address, it doesn't match my workstation. It matches a device registered to the executive floor." Victoria watched him work, fascinated despite herself. In 30 seconds, Nathan had identified anomalies that her entire IT department had missed in 3 weeks. "You were a software engineer at Google," she said quietly. "I read your file. Senior engineer, specialized in cybersecurity, 6-figure salary, stock options, the whole package." She paused. "Why are you working as a maintenance technician?" For a long moment, Nathan didn't answer. He looked at Emma, still sleeping peacefully, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because this job lets me drop her off at school every morning and pick her up at 4 o'clock every afternoon. Because she already lost her mother, and I couldn't let her lose her father to an 80-hour work week." He met Victoria's eyes. "Some things are more important than money." Victoria felt those words land somewhere deep inside her. Some things are more important than money? When was the last time she had believed that? "I need your help," she said. "Someone in this company framed you to cover up a much larger crime. I think I know who, but I need proof. Real proof. The kind that will hold up in court." "What kind of crime?" "Embezzlement. Possibly $2 million or more. Transferred to offshore accounts and hidden behind falsified records." Victoria's jaw tightened. "The man responsible is my CFO. He's been with the company since the beginning. I trusted him." Nathan absorbed this information, his expression shifting from surprise to determination. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to help me trace the money. Your skills far exceed anything my IT team has demonstrated so far. With your background in cybersecurity, you might be able to find evidence they've missed." Nathan nodded slowly. "I know systems like these inside out. Google used similar architecture for their security protocols. If there's evidence hidden in those logs, I can find it." Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around the room with the disorientation of a child waking in an unfamiliar place. Her gaze landed on Victoria, and she smiled sleepily. "Hi, Miss Lady." "Hi, Emma." Victoria stood. "Come with me. Both of you. We're going to my office. It's more secure there, and Emma can rest on the couch while we work." They followed her to the executive floor, Emma holding Nathan's hand and looking around at the expensive artwork and polished surfaces with wide eyes. When they entered Victoria's corner office, Emma immediately noticed the framed photograph on the desk. "She's pretty," Emma said, pointing at the picture of Eleanor Sterling. "Is that your mommy?" Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. "My mommy's in heaven too," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy says she turned into a star so she can watch over me at night." She looked up at Victoria with those big innocent eyes. "Maybe your mommy and my mommy are friends up there. Maybe they have tea together and talk about us." Victoria felt her eyes burn with tears she hadn't shed in years. This child, who had lost so much, still found ways to offer comfort, still believed in a universe where mothers became stars and had tea parties in heaven. "I think you might be right," Victoria said, her voice rough. "I think they might be very good friends." The next 48 hours unfolded like a chess game, played at lightning speed. Howard Crane discovered that Victoria was investigating and moved to protect himself. He called an emergency board meeting, citing concerns about the CEO's judgment and proposing a vote of no confidence. "She's wasting company resources on a terminated employee," Howard told the board members in a private call. "She's become emotionally compromised. The shareholders deserve better leadership." The vote was scheduled for Monday morning. Victoria had 2 days to find proof of Howard's crimes or lose everything she had built. She worked through the night in her office, Marcus bringing coffee and meals that she barely touched. Nathan arrived at 9 o'clock with Emma, unable to leave his daughter with anyone and unwilling to stay home while Victoria fought for both of them. "I can help," Nathan said, settling Emma on the office sofa with her tablet and a blanket. "Let me work alongside you. 2 sets of eyes are better than one." They worked side by side, Nathan's fingers flying across the keyboard, while Victoria cross-referenced financial records and communication logs. Emma slept peacefully in the corner, occasionally murmuring in her dreams. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Victoria's eyes began to close. Exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow, and before she could stop herself, her head dropped to the desk. She woke to the sensation of warmth on her shoulders. Nathan had draped his jacket over her like a blanket. He sat beside her now, close enough that she could smell coffee and something else, something clean and honest that cut through the sterile office air. "You should rest," he said quietly. "I can't. The board meeting is in 31 hours. You won't find anything if you collapse from exhaustion." Nathan's voice was gentle but firm. "When was the last time someone told you to take care of yourself?" Victoria couldn't remember. She genuinely couldn't remember the last time anyone had worried about her well-being instead of her performance. "I found something," Nathan said, apparently deciding that distraction was a valid form of care. "Howard's been moving money in small increments to avoid triggering automatic audits. Over the past 3 years, he's transferred approximately $2.3 million to an account in the Cayman Islands." Victoria sat up straighter, the exhaustion temporarily forgotten. "Can you prove it?" "Almost. The records are there, but they're encrypted. I need Howard's password to access the original files." They stared at each other, the weight of the obstacle settling over them. Then from the sofa, a small voice spoke up. "Daddy?" They turned to find Emma sitting up, rubbing her eyes. She had been awake long enough to hear some of their conversation, though how much she understood was unclear. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma pointed at a photograph on Victoria's wall, part of a display showing company executives at various events. It showed Howard Crane at a company picnic, grinning broadly with his arm around a golden retriever wearing a red bandana. "That's the grumpy man," Emma said excitedly. "I saw him in the hallway when you took me to get juice from the big coffee machine downstairs. He didn't smile at me, but his doggy in the picture looks nice." She scrunched up her face, concentrating hard. The doggy had a shiny tag with numbers, 1947. "I remember because you taught me to count to 10, and those numbers are all in there, but mixed up." Nathan and Victoria exchanged a look of dawning realization. Howard Crane's birth year, the kind of password a vain man would choose, his own beginning. Nathan turned back to the computer. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard for just a moment. Then he typed, Howard 1947. The file opened. Inside was everything they needed. Emails, transfer confirmations, a trail of evidence that led directly to Howard Crane, and by extension, to Ryan Mitchell, who had carried out the server attack on his uncle's orders. Victoria reached for her phone. Marcus, I need you to contact the FBI's cybercrime division. Tell them we have evidence of corporate embezzlement and we're prepared to cooperate fully with their investigation. She ended the call and looked at Nathan, who was staring at the screen with an expression of vindication and disbelief. It's over, he said. It's actually over. Not quite. Victoria's eyes were hard with determination. The board meeting is still happening, and I intend to give them a presentation they'll never forget. The Nexus Technologies boardroom occupied the entire top floor of the building, with panoramic windows that showcase Seattle's skyline in all its gray, rain-washed glory. On Monday morning, 12 board members gathered around the polished conference table, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Howard Crane sat at the head of the table, projecting confidence despite the sweat visible on his brow. Ryan Mitchell stood against the wall, arms crossed, smirking at the empty chair where Victoria should have been sitting. Ladies and gentlemen, Howard began, rising from his seat, I've called this emergency meeting to address a serious concern about our CEO's leadership. Over the past week, Victoria Sterling has demonstrated a troubling pattern of... The door opened. Victoria walked in, followed by Nathan, Marcus, and two men in dark suits who were unmistakably federal agents. My apologies for the interruption, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. But before you vote on Mr. Crane's motion, I have some information the board should see. She gestured to Marcus, who dimmed the lights and activated the presentation screen. What followed was a meticulous dismantling of Howard Crane's crimes. Bank records, email chains, security footage showing Ryan accessing the server room at the exact time of the crash. And finally, the encrypted files that proved $2.3 million had been siphoned from Nexus Technologies into offshore accounts. Howard's face contorted with rage. He slammed his fist on the table, making several board members flinch. This is a setup. She's fabricating evidence to protect her own incompetence. These files could have been planted by anyone. I demand an independent investigation. I demand... You demand nothing. Victoria's voice cut through his bluster like a scalpel through flesh. You stole from this company for 3 years. You destroyed an innocent man's career to cover your tracks. You used your own nephew as a weapon and then planned to let him take the fall if things went wrong. She turned to Ryan, who had gone pale. Did you know that, Ryan? Did your uncle tell you about the escape plan? The documents we found show he was preparing to transfer everything to a new account, one with only his name on it. You were always going to be the scapegoat, just like Nathan. Ryan's face twisted through a rapid succession of emotions: confusion, realization, and finally white-hot fury. You lying bastard! Ryan lunged toward Howard, restrained only by the FBI agents. You promised me we were partners. You said I'd get 20%. Shut up, you idiot, Howard shouted. But Ryan was beyond stopping. The betrayal had broken something loose inside him, and words poured out like water from a cracked dam. He made me do everything. The server crash, stealing Brooks' credentials, deleting the logs. All of it was his idea. He's been planning this for years. There are other accounts too, in Switzerland, in Singapore. He told me he'd set up the same scheme at his last 2 companies before they went bankrupt. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions. The FBI agents exchanged sharp glances, already calculating the scope of the investigation that had just expanded exponentially. Howard Crane, for the first time in 30 years, had nothing to say. One of the FBI agents stepped forward. Howard Crane, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit computer fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Victoria watched them being led away in handcuffs. First Howard, then Ryan, both in expensive suits that suddenly looked like costumes. Their confident postures had collapsed into the hunched shuffle of men who had lost everything. She felt no satisfaction. Only a grim sense of justice finally served. When the door closed behind them, Victoria turned to the board members, who sat in stunned silence. If there are no further motions, she said calmly, I believe we can adjourn. 1 week later, Victoria stood in the same conference room where everything had begun. The same table, the same chairs, the same view of the Seattle skyline. Though today, for the first time in weeks, the sun was actually shining. Nathan sat across from her, wearing a new suit that Marcus had helped him pick out. Emma sat beside him, swinging her legs and working on another cat drawing. I've spoken with the board, Victoria said. Your termination has been officially rescinded and expunged from your record. We're prepared to offer you a new position, Chief Technology Officer, reporting directly to me. Nathan stared at her. CTO? But I was a maintenance technician. You were a maintenance technician by choice. By capability, you're one of the most talented engineers I've ever encountered. Victoria slid a folder across the table. The salary is $190,000 annually, plus stock options and full benefits. We'll also cover Emma's childcare costs and provide flexible hours so you can maintain your current schedule with her. Nathan opened the folder, read the first page, and set it down again. His hands were trembling slightly. Why? He asked. You barely know me. You could have let this whole thing go after Howard was arrested. You didn't have to do any of this. Victoria was quiet for a moment. She looked at Emma, who was carefully drawing triangle ears on a new cat. She looked at Nathan, this man who had given up everything for his daughter and never once complained about the sacrifice. When I saw you in that hallway, she said finally, I saw something I recognized. A person trying to shield someone they love from pain, putting their child's needs above their own pride, their own comfort, their own future. She paused, her voice softening. My mother did that for me. She worked herself to exhaustion so I could have opportunities she never had. And when she was wrongfully fired, no one helped her. No one believed her. Victoria met Nathan's eyes. I made a promise to her before she died that if I ever had the power to prevent an innocent person from suffering what she suffered, I would use it. You gave me the chance to keep that promise. Emma looked up from her drawing. Miss Victoria, can I ask you something? Of course, Emma. Do you still not have anyone to hug you when you're sad? The question hung in the air. Nathan looked embarrassed, but Victoria felt something warm bloom in her chest. I've been thinking about that question a lot, she admitted, and I think maybe I've been so focused on building my company that I forgot to build a life. Emma nodded sagely, as if this confirmed a suspicion she had held all along. Then she held up her drawing. I made this for you. It's us. See? That's Daddy, and that's me, and that's you. We're all holding hands under the sun. Victoria took the drawing with hands that weren't quite steady. 3 figures, a tall man with brown hair, a small girl with pigtails, and a woman in a gray suit, all standing together under a bright yellow sun. Above them, Emma had drawn 2 stars. Those are the mommies, Emma explained. Yours and mine. They're watching us and smiling because we found each other. Victoria couldn't speak. For the first time in years, she didn't trust her voice. Nathan reached across the table and gently took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, an anchor in a storm she hadn't realized she was still weathering. Have dinner with us, he said. Tonight. Emma's been asking for pizza for a week now. Victoria looked at their joined hands, at Emma's hopeful face, at the drawing of three people who had found each other through circumstance and pain and unexpected grace. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." 6 months later, Victoria stood at a podium in the lobby of a newly renovated community center in Tacoma. A banner hung above her head, reading, "The Sarah Brooks Foundation, Supporting Families in Medical Crisis." Beside her stood Nathan, now her CTO, and something much more important than that. And next to him stood Emma, wearing a new dress and holding a giant pair of ceremonial scissors. "This foundation exists because of a woman I never met," Victoria told the crowd. "Sarah Brooks was a mother, a wife, and by all accounts, an extraordinary person. She died because the healthcare system failed her family, because insurance companies value profit over people, because too many families face impossible choices between paying for treatment and keeping a roof over their heads." She looked at Nathan, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Sarah's husband taught me something important. He taught me that some things are more valuable than stock options and quarterly reports. He taught me that being present for the people you love is the greatest success anyone can achieve, and he gave me something I didn't know I was missing." Emma tugged at Victoria's hand. "Can I cut the ribbon now?" The crowd laughed and Victoria smiled, the genuine kind of smile that had been so rare before that rainy Friday afternoon when she had seen a man clutching a termination letter and a child waiting with innocent hope. "Yes, sweetheart, you can cut the ribbon." Emma positioned the scissors and with great concentration snipped the red ribbon in two. The crowd applauded, cameras flashed, and somewhere above them the Seattle sun broke through the clouds. That night, in Victoria's penthouse, which was no longer quite so empty, Emma fell asleep on the couch between two people who had both known terrible loss and had somehow found their way back to hope. Victoria looked at Nathan over their daughter's sleeping form. Their daughter. She had never expected that word to apply to her, had never imagined she would find herself here, in a life so different from the one she had planned. "Thank you," Nathan said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. That day in the hallway, when everyone else saw a failure, you saw the truth." Victoria leaned over and kissed him gently. "You're the one who taught me what truth really means. It's not just about facts and evidence. It's about seeing people for who they really are, not whose circumstances have made them appear to be." She looked at Emma, at this child who had lost her mother but still believed in stars and tea parties in heaven, at this girl who had asked a simple question that had cracked something open inside Victoria and let the light come flooding in. "Who hugs you when you're sad?" Victoria knew the answer now, and it was better than anything she could have imagined. On the wall of her home office, two drawings hung side by side. The first was Emma's original sketch, three figures holding hands under a yellow sun, with two stars watching from above. The second was newer, more detailed, drawn just last week during one of their Sunday afternoon art sessions. This one showed a house, not a penthouse or an apartment, but a real house with a yard and a tree and a swing. Three people stood in front of it, a man, a woman, and a girl. Above them, written in Emma's careful handwriting, were the words, "My family." Some things Victoria had learned were more important than money, and some people, when you were very lucky, walked into your life at exactly the right moment, carrying boxes of broken dreams and small daughters with butterfly backpacks, and somehow made everything whole again.